the regimental commander, Colonel Tucker, hollered out for me and my buddy, Rivers, and we went running back to where he was at, and he said to me, Maggie, he said, you take them 2 cans, we had 2 tank destroyers with us, and take that town, get in that town. That was the only order we had. And so we started in. The first thing we knew, we were in the middle of a whole bunch of Germans. I was leading the platoon. I was platoon leader. I mean, they had 25, 26 people. And my other buddy with the other platoon following me, they had about the same. There were about 50 of us, and all of a sudden we were in the middle of about 250 Germans. And we opened fire on them. We were just in the middle of them. We just opened fire in all directions. And unloaded our weapons, and bodies were everywhere, and it was just a slaughter.
You are about to embark upon the great crusade
to meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
Parachuting was new then, and it was different, and it was a challenge. And then it was to be part of it, this was pretty exciting. And it attracted a special kind of guy, and still does, someone who's willing to jump out of an airplane as part of his mission. But it attracted me. I guess I was just one of those kinds of guys that I had an opportunity to do other things in the Army that would not have been in combat or in the line of fire anywhere. But I wanted to go where the action would be, and that was in combat. And so paratroopers was the best way to do it. And so I volunteered and was willing to jump out of planes in order to get into combat.
And your first action was in Naples, Italy, correct?
Well, it was an Italian campaign, yes, through Naples and through the mountains of Italy. And then when we couldn't reach the German line, we made an end run, and we made the Anzio beachhead landing. I was in the Anzio beachhead. That was an assault landing. We didn't jump there. We came in landing ships and assaulted on shore, and then charged inland and set up the beachhead.
Anzio is one of the most famous episodes of the Italian campaign, but that's also where you were injured, correct?
That is correct. And I should add that it was one of the bloodiest campaigns of the war, where 30,000 Allied troops were killed. 30,000. That 30,000 killed, and it didn't count the wounded and other casualties. And it was a bloody battle, but it was a test of the German strength in order to fight in another theater, and they responded to that with some of their best troops, determined to drive us off the beachhead.
And how were you injured?
Well, we were in close combat with the Germans. They were attempting to push us off the beachhead, and the first time I was injured, it was in a firefight, but I was injured by fragments off of a hand grenade. We were throwing hand grenades at each other, and so I got a fragment off of that. And but that didn't take me out of action. I had a shrapnel in me, and I was wounded. But later, I was then in a firefight with the Germans again in close range, and I was shot through the arm, and my arm went limp, and I bled a lot, and so on. I was eventually evacuated and hospitalized.
So then you spent time recovering in England. How long were you there?
Well, we left Anzio, and I believe it was in June, and went to England, and then we jumped in Holland on September 17th, 1944. So we were there for that period of time.
How excited were you to get back into action after that recovery time in England?
Well, I wouldn't say the term excited or whatever, but mind you now, we were in a war. There was no doubt about it. And we had run up against some of the best German troops. In fact, in Italy, the Hermann Göring troops were some of their best troops, which I had indicated earlier. I learned a lot from the way they operated and their tactics. But the war was going on, and we were combat troops. That was our only purpose in being. And to be left out of any battle, well, I mean, that didn't set well with us because, sure, we knew that the risk involved. We knew combat. We knew that there'd be casualties. We accepted that. We had come to terms with those things a long time before. So all of a sudden, the campaign's coming up. We want to be in on it, if not lead it, be in on it. And we were experienced. We had more experience then because we fought in Italy than any other units. The units that went in Normandy were all, from me, come into England, and that was their first mission. And we'd already been in combat for almost a year, so we felt that we were best qualified in those terms of leading this assault. So it was a question of excitement. It was a question of what is our purpose in being here? The war was going on. Then if the war is going on, use the best you got for the toughest jobs. We felt we were those guys. And so there was, I don't say excited or anything, we were disappointed that we weren't in the lead element.
American Military University is a proud sponsor of this video. AMU is excited to announce a 10% veteran grant for eligible veterans and their families, which can be applied to undergraduate and master level courses. I personally love AMU because I took many courses on my deployments to Afghanistan that really helped me get a head start when I left the military. For more information and eligibility, follow the link in the description below.
Now, when it came to Market Garden, your objective was the Wall River near Nijmegen, correct?
No, it was more than that. We were part of what was the world's largest airborne operation. There were 3 divisions that jumped in Holland, in Market Garden. The 101st Airborne Division was below us, then the 82nd, and then the British 1st Division. And the mission was for us to sweep through Holland and through Arnhem, the so-called bridge too far, where the British had jumped, and that was one of their objectives. And once we got through Arnhem and it crossed through Holland and crossed the bridges, then we would turn and go east and head for Berlin, Germany. And the plan was originally is once we turned and headed for Germany, nothing would be really there to stop us. We'd go on into Berlin. And so the mission was just not Nijmegen and the bridges. That was part of the mission. And it so happened that capturing Nijmegen and the bridges was part of our objective in the 504th. We had other objectives. There were other little towns around, other bridges and canals and so on that we captured. But the most notable, and you mentioned, was the Wall River. The Wall River was one of our objectives, and it was in our area of operations. And the Germans still occupied Nijmegen, so we had to clear Nijmegen. And then what we had to do was secure the bridges, the 2 large bridges. There was a railroad bridge over the Wall River and then a highway bridge. We had to secure those because the British, Montgomery's First Army and the 30th, led by the 30th Armored Corps, was coming up from below us, from Eindhoven and the 101st, and would be coming through our area, and they'd have to cross the rivers and cross the bridges and the Wall River to get to Arnhem, where the British 1st Parachute Division was very heavily engaged and was in serious difficulties. And so there was a great urgency for us to control Nijmegen and the bridges. And to control the bridges, we had to control both sides. We only jumped on one side of the Wall River. That was to the south, and none of us jumped to the north with the objective of, on our initial jump, to control the bridges. And the British tanks would not cross the rivers. There was any chance that the bridges would be blown, and while they were crossing. So there was great urgency for us to control the Nijmegen and the bridges on both sides. And to do that, they decided that we'd have to make a river crossing downstream somewhat from the bridges. But the problem was that we were airborne troops. We weren't amphibious troops. And we had a lot of young guys. And in my company, we had a lot of teenagers, kids just out of school. Some had never even been in a boat alone. And then the thought of having to cross the river, well, that was something else. We'd not had any training for that. Our training was for other purposes. But in any event, that was it. And where would the boats come from? Well, it so happened that the 30th Corps had boats somewhere in their column. They weren't sure where, because this was a column that was strung out for miles in Holland over a single road that they were coming with all their armor and everything. But somewhere in there were these boats. And we didn't know just where or whatever. But it was decided in any case that we would make the landing. And we were told that there were 28 boats. And that the only 2 rifle companies out of my battalion would be able to go across in the first wave. And I happened to be in one of the companies. That was H Company, and the other company was I Company. Anyway, we took positions in defilade on our side of the river behind a big dike, and we were strung out, and we waited for boats, and they eventually arrived. And when they did, it kind of shocked everybody because they brought them in on lorries, on British trucks, and they lift up the back curtain on these trucks, and they peel off these boats like a deck of cards. We had to open them up. They were canvas boats, and there were staves that held them up, and the bottom was a piece of plywood, no motor, no means of propulsion whatsoever, or anything else. That was the boats. And we were going to cross this river, which had a pretty heavy current, is used for commercial purposes in a large river, and that's what we had. And while we were waiting during the course of the day, it became evident to us that the Germans had taken up strong positions on the other side of the river, expecting we were going to do it. The Wall River crossing is noted, well, for severity, obviously, because of the difficulty that it presented us, but it's noted more for its daring and courage. To dare in broad daylight in canvas boats to paddle across the river in the face of enemy fire on the other side. And once you got on the other side, you had to traverse up to 800 yards of open ground on which machine guns would be laying fire on you. That was the daring part of it, and the courage was to be able to do it. That was the story of the Wall River. We took heavy casualties. We had, in short order, 48 men killed. By the time we were able to rouse the Germans from their positions and get to the bridges, we had 48 killed and maybe 150 wounded. So the lead was heavy, and it was what we viewed as a very difficult mission. And we continued in the Holland operation for 62 days altogether. We fought in Holland. Fought the Germans in one way or another for 62 days before being relieved and being pulled back to Paris, or being pulled back to France.
62 days, wow. Well, within a couple of months of Market Garden, it was clear that the Germans were on their heels. They put up their last stand at what's known as the Battle of the Bulge, and starting in December of 1944. Where was your unit at that time?
Well, when we pulled back from Holland, we were bivouacked in Paris, in the old French army barracks. The 82nd was there, and we were preparing to spend Christmas there. And the orderly rooms were beginning to decorate somewhat and everything for Christmas. And then on the night of December December 16th, we got word that the Germans had made a breakthrough in Belgium and that were heading for Antwerp, and then they were going full speed. And they called General Gavin, who was the 82nd Airborne Division commander, and said, "You're now the Corps commander because General Ridgway, the Corps commander, is in the States for Christmas." Everybody was celebrating the holidays, and the commander of the 101st Airborne Division, General Taylor, had gone to the States, and so on. So the Germans caught us by surprise, and they broke through our lines in the Ardennes area where we had new troops. And they broke through there and were heading for Antwerp, and their objective was to seize Antwerp, a port which they could use, and at the same time would divide the British and U.S. forces and give them a stronger position from which they could negotiate some kind of a settlement. We were demanding unconditional surrender. We accept nothing less from the Germans, and that was well known. But they felt, or that certainly Hitler felt, or the German High Command felt, that if they could achieve a victory and control something, that they could then say, well, okay, let's talk about it. And they could salvage something out of it, because I think they realized they weren't going to win the war. And so it was then that we went into Belgium completely unprepared for winter weather and for what we were to face. And again, we spent 62 days in combat in some of the most brutal weather that we had to face. And we either went in to try and find the Germans, to stop them in their forward advances, and once we did that, to push them back, which we did. And we were there 62 days in the Battle of the Bulge. I think that that's pretty well known, the outcome of it. I was in some very serious fighting, and in fact, I was got a Silver Star in a early battle for the city of Chenot, and then another later on in a battle for Harrisbach, another city in the Battle of the Bulge. So we did a lot of heavy fighting. We had a lot of heavy casualties, and it was really tough.
Let's talk about Harrisbach. That's just an amazing story. This is near Bastogne, and you had a relatively small group of men under your command when you saw a huge number, comparatively, of German forces coming your way, although they hadn't seen you yet. Explain what happened.
Well, Harrisbach was an objective of the 82nd objective, because it was on the way to the Siegfried line, and that was we were going to cross Siegfried, but we had to contend with Harrisbach, and we knew that there was a large German contingent there, and it was an important center for them, and so they planned to attack with 2 battalions out of the regiment. My battalion, the 3rd Battalion, and the 2nd Battalion from the south, and we would attack, but that we would spend the whole day getting in position. And we went 10 miles through deep snow, fighting elements and outposts of the German forces to take a position where we could attack Harrisbach. And while we were getting ready, and it was dusk, it was approaching in the evening, while we were getting ready, and we were going to spend the night there in this cold winter below zero, without blankets, without any cover, without any shelter, without anything, and attack in the morning when the Germans came out of town at us in a larger force. And when that happened, the regimental commander, Colonel Tucker, hollered out for me and my buddy, Rivers, and we went running back to where he was at, and he said to me, Maggie, he said, you take them 2 cans, we had 2 tank destroyers with us, and take that town, get in that town. That was the only order we had. And so we started in. The first thing we knew, we were in the middle of a whole bunch of Germans. I was leading a platoon. I was a platoon leader. I mean, they had 25, 26 people. And my other buddy, with the other platoon following me, they had about the same. There were about 50 of us, and all of a sudden we were in the middle of about 250 Germans. And we opened fire on them. We were just in the middle of them. We just opened fire in all directions. and unloaded our weapons, and bodies were everywhere, and it was just a slaughter. I mean, the Germans panicked, and we just unloaded on them. And even just about the time that was done, a tank comes out from the side road and starts firing at us with a machine gun from a turret. The turret is up there, and they're firing machine guns, and they're firing in it, and I was leading the element of the attack, and the men all took for cover. And so they were a threat to us, and I, as a platoon leader, then instinctively, and I say instinctively because we'd already been in combat almost 2 years. There was nothing by the book anymore. It was all responding to situations in battle and in the heat of battle. I charged towards this tank, but I was able to do it in a concealed way because it was a wooded area, and I could duck in and out and get close enough to this tank where I had with me in my pocket what's called a gammon grenade, an explosive grenade, an explosive made out of composition C, an explosive device with a firing device that we made up into a hand grenade, and it had the force of, say, a 105 millimeter shell. I had that with me, and then a hand grenade, fragmentation hand grenade, and I charged towards this tank. They didn't see me, and I got close enough where I could throw the gammon grenade against the side of the tank. The purpose of that being to disable the movement of the tank, because it was in the tracking device and it was vulnerable, and I did that, and they probably shook up the whole tank and the crew that was in there and everything. But in any event, the guy in the turret then went down. The turret was open. I charged up and got up there close enough where I could get in there, and then dropped a hand grenade in there. And I believe that Mark V had a crew of 5 people that were in there when I threw the hand grenade in there. And then it was quiet. And so then I came back and got my guys together again. And my other buddy and brought up his platoon. And they said, okay, now let's take this town. And we did. And that's a long story in itself, of the battle that pursued and the prisoners that we took. The long and short of it was that when the fighting stopped that evening, when we captured the city, we had killed, by my calculation, 180 Germans and taken over 200 prisoners, and we never lost a man. Never lost a man. When I got back from putting troops, setting troops on the perimeter to defend the city from a counterattack, whatever troops I could get together of our troops. And I went back, and then for the first time I saw the company commander and the executive officer, and they were euphoric. They were just euphoric. Anyway, we pushed on from there, and then we pushed through Germany, and the German troops that were falling back. We had very little resistance at the Siegfried line, and as we got into Germany, they were pulling back. But one thing that stands out in my mind, and I have a couple of minutes, I want to comment on it, as we were going forward, and I was still with H Company, the company I'd always been with, and we were moving forward in our area of operation. We had a leading group, a squad out front. I get a call from them over the telephone. We run across a barbed wire camp in here, and we looked in there, and there's a lot of skinny men. And we see. And I said, wait, I'll be there. So I went up there and charged up there, and we got up there with them, and we went up to the gate, and we blew the lock off the gate, and we walked in, and it was a concentration camp. It was outside of the city of Ludwigsburg. The camp was known as Wobelin. It was a death camp. The German political prisoners and Jews and more than that were there. And so we walked in, and we saw this camp as it existed on a working day, so to speak. working there for. There were bodies all over. They were waiting to be disposed of. They were going to bury it. This body, there were tons of them all over. A few of them that were alive were barely alive. There wasn't anybody there that weighed over 65 pounds that was alive. And the rest I saw was horrible. It was a terrible thing. And it was there that I fully realized what the cause greater than ourselves was that we had been fighting for. I fully realized what the real cause was. And I state this, and I write it, and it's written in my book. And that is to destroy the monstrosity the Nazis had created before and engulf freedom-loving people everywhere, that nobody would be able to escape them if they weren't stopped. That monstrosity. That was the cause greater than ourselves that we were fighting for. Sure, we were fighting for things we believe in and so on. But the greater cause was to destroy that monstrosity. Because if it was allowed to continue, it certainly would, as I said, engulf freedom-loving people everywhere.